Funding for Behind the Headlines is provided by DHG and Advisors. DHG is a full-service accounting firm serving Memphis and the Mid-South region for more than 60 years, combining community involvement with the technical resources of a national firm. For more information, visit dhgllp.com.
Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
The state of downtown Memphis with the outgoing head of the Downtown Memphis Commission tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I'm joined tonight by Paul Morris, president of the Downtown Memphis Commission. Thanks for being here again.
Thanks for having me.
And Bill Dries, senior reporter with the Memphis Daily News. So you are leaving. We'll talk a little bit about that. I mean, it's by your choice and so on. There's no particular news in that. But we thought it was a good time to bring you on and talk about some of the projects that are going on. And you've been there 5 years. You started in 2008.
Started in 2010.
2010,
right,
excuse
right.
me.
2015 now.
You were on the board before then, and maybe that's
true.
part of what
yeah,
I was thinking
I had been a volunteer board member for 5 years
Right.
before that, and
Right.
I had been chair of the board in 2008.
Okay, so you're chair of the board in 2008, and the economy goes haywire. I mean, it's
Right.
the Great Recession. Why would you take that job? A job that is so real estate heavy, that is about development, is about encouraging developers to invest at a time when the economy was crumbling.
Well, I guess if you're going to take a job like this, it's good to set the bar low and hopefully be able to exceed it. So, taking the job at a time when really not a lot was going on, not a lot in the pipeline, it was really a challenge, but it gave me an opportunity to work kind of within the organization to make downtown work better. And as the economy has improved, the deal pipeline has increased pretty rapidly.
And so, I don't know, some of the high points for you of projects that you're most proud of, maybe one project or a few of them.
Well, there's a lot. The big things and the small things I'm most proud of. The Chiska redevelopment took a lot of effort. We redeveloped One Commerce Square to help that building from going dark. We kind of had a Save Our Skyline campaign when I first started because we were really in jeopardy of losing a couple of towers going dark, including the Morgan Keegan Tower, Raymond James, and also One Commerce Square. And being able to redevelop and save One Commerce Square from going dark, as well as James Lee House in Victorian Village, fixing sidewalks, things like that, the bocce ball court in South Main, or the barking lot, dog park, little things and big things.
Yeah, Bill.
Paul, it's interesting that we're coming out of the recession, and we've come out of it really, really slowly. But are you kind of surprised that what we've seen in terms of One Beale, in terms of the Chiska, which had been a deal before the recession, are you kind of surprised that it's kind of like these projects have been on hold and now they're back again, as opposed to a new crop kind of replacing them?
I'm not surprised, because although they're back, they're really in a different iteration. They're the same location, but One Beale is a really quite different project than it had been when the recession killed that earlier iteration. The Horizon project really is back in the same kind of form with a condo. I think one of the things that surprised me about that one is that it is back in the same form to be condo. Most observers in real estate had projected that would be apartments or some other use, and it's come back as condo, which is a testament to the fact that even the condo market in downtown is starting to come back.
And just the Horizon is the building, for those who come in maybe off, what is that?
Riverside Drive.
Riverside Drive,
Right.
that was finished, built, and then stopped at
Right.
about 80% or something like that, and it's just been dark since around 07, 08, 09. I can't remember quite when it was.
That's about right. Yeah, 08, and it went
Right.
dark, 80% complete. They even had crown molding in some of the units before they went bankrupt, and it's been dark since then.
And that'll be done in the next year or so, something like that?
Yes, the new owners are investing millions of dollars, and they're already selling condos.
And then the One Beale, describe that a little bit more for those. It'd be right at the foot of Beale Street, kind of overlooking Beale Street Landing, and is George Carlisle, the Carlisle Corp, doing what?
Yeah, so the Carlisle Corporation, Gene and his two sons, are working on a plan, and right now it's a plan, and it's pretty far along, but it's not a done deal yet. So I always like to caution people not to get too excited until we start turning dirt. But it's a plan to put 2 towers, one of them 30 stories tall, the other not quite as tall, and it will have a hotel, it will have residential, it will have office, it will have meeting space, and it will have retail. And it would be right at the corner of Beale Street and Riverside Drive. It would also have a parking structure that would not only serve that, but also Beale Street Landing and the riverfront and Beale Street. We've heard a lot of talk about the need for parking at Beale Street Landing and the riverfront, and this project would help address that as well.
And back to Bill.
In terms of hotel rooms, we've seen a lot of them come online, and you know as well as anyone that those deals were just thought to be almost impossible to finance during the recession. With the rooms that we have in the wings, some of them are waiting financing, some of them have financing. What does that do in terms of conventions and meetings downtown?
Well, more hotel rooms certainly help, but what we really need is more hotel rooms under one roof and under common control. A big hotel, full-service hotel, really helps move the needle on conventions and conferences in a way that some of the limited services hotels you've heard announced don't. Now, the One Beale project would be a full-service hotel with its own meeting space, and I think that would do a lot to attract meetings and conferences to downtown. It wouldn't necessarily do a lot to help fill Cook Convention Center, but it would help fill that space and bring a lot of new people to downtown to spend money.
Right, and there's been so much discussion over so many years about what happens with the convention center, whether there's a need for a new one. Would the growth in hotel rooms, if you can get them under one roof or reasonably close to each other, could that take on a life of its own and maybe dictate a different location for a convention center?
I don't think so. This is my opinion, and not speaking for others, but I strongly believe that we should not try to build a new convention center. I think talking about building a big, huge new convention center like Nashville is a waste of time, and it distracts us from things that we can achieve to really help move the needle in conventions and conferences in Memphis. I think that is reinvesting in the Cook and making and upgrading that, and then looking at other opportunities to have a product in Memphis that's distinct from some of these other cities who have these big mammoth convention centers where you go and the only other people you see have the name tags, and it's kind of a sterile environment. So I really like the mayor's idea of perhaps looking at Peabody Place and turning that into a boutique conference center, and then having that be a complementary structure to the Cook, and then linking those with the transportation mode down Main Street. I think that's a more achievable and actually a better competitive model for Memphis.
And what, I've heard a handful of developers say that some of the big empty lots, so if you're coming straight downtown Union, before you get to AutoZone Park, off to the left, there's a big empty lot.
Yes.
And there's some big empty lots around FedEx Forum.
Right.
So despite all the good things you're talking about, there's still some big sort of, blighted or just abandoned properties. That some of the problem is people holding out for a convention center, that they don't want to commit to anything else. Is that your sense of it? And is there anything to be done about those big blighted or just abandoned looking lots?
That raises a good point. It reminds me of a story that happened before I took this job. I was an attorney, and I represented the owner of the convention hotel downtown, and that was right next to Cook. And they had just negotiated a deal to sell that hotel, and the new owner was going to invest a lot of money into that hotel and expand it and enhance it, and even the neighborhood around it. And that deal had been struck. It had not closed yet, but the contract was pending. And I was showing the new owner around town, and all of a sudden Mayor Harrington announced that we're going to build a new convention center on the other side of town.
Right.
That deal collapsed. And the point of that story is that when political leaders announce big new projects, it affects the private market and stunts investment and progress. Right. So I think, again, one of the mistakes that some people make in Memphis is talking about building a huge new convention center on the other side of town, because it keeps progress from occurring around the convention center that we have. And Memphis made a choice to use our funding vehicles that other cities in Tennessee have used for convention centers. We chose to use it for Bass Pro and FedEx Forum. And that's our choice, and I think that that's a good one, but it's an opportunity cost. We do not have the TDZ vehicle, the Tourism Development Zone vehicle, to fund the new convention center. And that's the primary way to fund something like that.
You mentioned Bass Pro. So Bass Pro, sometime this spring, I can't remember the date, in May.
May 1st.
May 1st will open.
Yeah.
And that will do what for downtown?
Well, it's going to bring millions of new people to Bass Pro. And the question will be how many of those millions of new people will also be downtown Memphis customers. It'll immediately provide jobs, it'll provide revenue and economic development in downtown. But the question is, and the challenge really is, to convert some of those Bass Pro customers who are going to be driving in off the interstate, coming down Jefferson, which is the main entrance for Bass Pro, and parking their car in the parking lot of Bass Pro, to convert those customers to come back downtown, stay an extra day, visit Beale Street, visit the things going on in downtown Memphis. But it can't help but help downtown Memphis.
Right. I make this joke about Bass Pro way too often, which is Bass Pro isn't for me needing a fishing shirt or a couple lures and driving downtown. I might, but I don't know why. I'm probably going to go to the other Bass Pro, or I'm going to go somewhere else. It is a tourist. It is retail destination tourism, right?
Well, it's an experience, and you know, the renderings I've seen and the descriptions I've seen. I live downtown with my family. We are going to love to go to this place and go to the aquarium, go to the zip line, go to the bowling alley, go to the restaurant.
But the last thing you might do is buy some fishing lures. I mean, on some level.
I'm not a hunter or a fisherman, and you know, so it's hard for me to imagine.
It's hard for me to describe the project to people out of town. They're like, well, how many fishing lures can you fit, you know, in a place that big? But more, go ahead.
Well, I remember people a long time ago saying they wanted to turn the pyramid into an aquarium or some sort of tourist museum or something. And what I like about the Bass Pro project is it's not the government running this museum or aquarium. It's the private sector investing millions of their own dollars to come in there with help of public subsidy for sure. But it's the private sector creating this experience and it's a company that's good at creating this experience, and it's going to draw more people to downtown. I think one of the mistakes sometimes we make is trying to have the government set up some sort of tourist destination, and those don't work out as well.
Yeah.
Well, and the other point about Bass Pro Shops is I believe that they sell more boats than just about anybody else does in this country. And they're on the Mississippi River. So some of this is going to be the river experience. So it looks just to me, not really being schooled in this, as if they're on the river that people then are more apt to take in some of the river experience that we have beyond Bass Pro Shops.
Right, and I think that's one of the advantages we've got, the Mississippi River, and we're now starting to embrace this river in a way that we haven't for many years as Memphians, with Bass Pro coming, with the Big River crossing next to the Harahan Bridge, and with Beale Street Landing and some of the other projects that are coming online on the riverfront, and then connecting that with some boats to water taxis to the tip of Mud Island. I think that once Bass Pro's open, there's going to be a lot of momentum for improving Mud Island and the riverfront, and you'll have millions of new people who are going to get to come experience the river. And I think another thing that Bass Pro points out is that we are the intersection of 3 states. Downtown Memphis is not the center of our city, but it is the center of a 3-state region, and Bass Pro is going to draw some of the people from Arkansas and Mississippi who may not come to downtown otherwise.
Let's talk about that area south where the Big River crossing on the Harahan Bridge is, and a bit about what is going on there. It really looks as if development, residential development, other kind of development, is about to jump Crump Boulevard and go into South Memphis proper. First of all, the boundaries of downtown Memphis Commission. Are you all south of Crump?
No, Crump is our boundaries on the south.
Okay. In terms of the growth that we see heading toward Crump, though, is most of that residential? Is most of it commercial?
Most of it is residential. Residential usually drives retail and other commercials, so we can expect that to follow. I really think there's a lot more to fill in between the South Main District and Crump, so there's a lot more time to fill in that area before you do jump Crump, but I think that does provide that opportunity to go into South Memphis. And you know, the Big River crossing and the Harahan Bridge, the main-to-main project, has helped inspire the South Junction residential project. It's helped inspire the Eco Park in West Memphis that has been discussed, and it's helped inspire this Levee Trail regional system, and it's helped inspire a lot of other projects, including the new owners of the Horizon, who are motivated in part by the proximity of that project to that trail.
And French Fort as well,
Yes.
although French Fort, as I understand it, is a lot more dependent on the I-55 roundabout.
Yes, so French Fort will be unlocked a lot when that I-55 roundabout comes online, and will also hopefully inspire us to be able to figure out a way to connect the trail that is the main-to-main path to French Fort, which has to go under those bridges. And there's some challenges in doing that, but it seems like a natural connection of our riverfront to French Fort.
And French Fort is right around the Metal Museum area,
Yes.
right at that strange sort of intersection where you can go down Riverside Drive, or you can take a left and go across over to Arkansas, and that there will be a giant roundabout there, which is hard to envision.
Well, that's the plan, and it's a long-term project,
okay.
and we don't know
Right.
exactly when it's going to start or finish, but that is the plan, and it'll help create more of a neighborhood feel for Riverside Drive instead of being an extension of the I-55 interstate.
Right.
And will also help unlock what is really now kind of a secret neighborhood over there, the French Fort. It's a wonderful neighborhood on the riverfront.
Right.
It's got a lot of assets, including the Metal Museum.
And let's jump back to Bass Pro just for a second, up on the north end of downtown, the Pinch District.
Sure.
When the Tigers, there are plenty of people who probably don't remember this, but when the Tigers played at the Pyramid the first years when the Grizzlies were there, Pinch District was more active, maybe not vibrant, but it was certainly much more active. It has probably taken the biggest hit with the Pyramid
Right.
going dark. I mean, there's
Right.
very little left up there, and I apologize to those folks who are still running businesses and so on. What are your hopes? What are your realistic hopes for the Pinch District as Bass Pro opens?
Yeah, I mean, the existing businesses in Pinch District are hanging on. I mean, Westies with their, famous hot fudge pie is still there. I go
Right.
eat there, the Redfish Gallery, and there's
Right.
others, Alcinia's. But the fact is a lot of parking lots, a lot of empty buildings in the Pinch. And what the Pinch is waiting on is for Bass Pro to open. And a lot of people are kind of not knowing how to proceed with the Pinch because of we're all want to know what's going on with Bass Pro. My concern, though, is the way Bass Pro is structured and the way their business model works. They really want to capture the sales within the Bass Pro area.
Yeah.
And right now, the way to get to Bass Pro off the interstate is to come in Jefferson.
Yeah.
So you don't ever really you don't drive through the Pinch to get to Bass Pro. And then when you're there, it's not really a natural, the opening of Bass Pro is facing south, not towards the Pinch.
Right.
And it's not really a very natural connection right now. And in fact, as of March, there's no construction on a bridge connecting to the Pinch.
Will there be a bridge?
That's the plan. The plan that we approved
Because it was
includes
taken
a bridge.
down, right? There was a bridge there, if people remember, that you could go from the Pinch District side
Yes.
and cross over into the Pyramid, or you could go down below. But they tore down where the
Yes.
statue, the
plaza.
Ramsey statue, the
That's
plaza.
right.
That was all torn down. But the plan is to put a bridge back.
The plan is to put a bridge back. That's in the approved plans, and so that's essential. I mean, that's essential to unlocking the Pinch development, and so
Yeah.
we certainly expect that to happen and look forward to that happening soon. But it is a real challenge for the Pinch because I think a lot of people, including some property owners, expect that when Bass Pro opens, that their property values are just going to be so high that they're going to
Right.
be able to flip it and make a lot of money. And again, it's speculators in some cases who are holding out for much higher
Right.
prices. Plus, you have the city who's announced this plan to buy all the property in the Pinch, either voluntarily or not, and have a master development occur.
What
in
is the
Pinch.
status of that plan?
The status of that plan, last I heard from the city's Office of Housing and Community Development, is that the plan is for the city, once Bass Pro opens, to go and buy all those properties and issue an RFP to a developer to develop them. Now, the challenge is, in the meantime, while that doesn't occur,
Yeah.
nothing else really can. Like my organizations, we kind of do more parcel by parcel development. We work with the private property owners to develop their properties. We're really not in a position to give much incentives to help the Pinch because our creator, the city, has a plan to buy all the property.
Yeah.
So there's no incentive
Do
to
they have
increase
funding?
property
Does the
value.
city have funding? I remember this plan, and I just haven't heard about it. Does the city have funding for that plan, or they have to go through city council? I mean, is it an idea that still has to be?
No, the city does not have funding.
Yeah.
The plan would be for the city to issue additional bonds based on the same revenue stream that's supporting Bass Pro. Legally, before additional bonds can be issued supported by that same revenue stream, because of the bond documents say that Bass Pro and the rest of downtown sales have to meet certain metrics over time. And if those metrics are met, which are relatively ambitious metrics, then the city's able to issue more bonds, again backed by the city revenue streams, non-ad valorem, non-property tax streams,
Right.
to allow them to issue new bonds. All that being said, I think we're ways off before
Which
the city's
again
gonna be
gets
able
back to your
do that.
issue of when government puts out a plan
Yes.
that isn't fully baked or fully executed, it freezes development.
Yeah,
So-
there's a cost to
or
it.
can freeze development.
And it's not that you shouldn't do that. I think government should do that.
Right.
But it should also recognize and make sure the public understands that there's an opportunity cost. When the government comes in there and says, hey, we're going to redevelop the Pinch, but yet we don't have the funding yet, we don't have the plan yet, but it's going to happen one day down the road, Well, in the meantime, nothing happens.
Yeah,
And it prevents the private sector from kind of doing what the private sector does.
Would you
which is
say this
parcel
if
by
you weren't
parcel
retiring in a few months?
I've
Be
said
honest.
this.
You have. Okay.
I have said this in my board meetings many times, and when people ask. One of the great things about my job, and I want to put out a plug for how awesome my job is.
Yeah, they're hiring.
In case anybody else is looking, because we're going to be hiring pretty soon. I don't report to the City Hall.
That's an interesting point.
I
That's a very
report to an independent board. Now that board is appointed by 2 mayors, but we are a joint city-county agency.
Right.
So Mayor Luttrell appoints some of my board members,
Yeah.
and Mayor Wharton appoints some of my board members. But I can tell you, my board members are independent thinkers. They're not, calling one of the mayors to find out how they should vote on things. So I'm not in the bureaucratic chain of command at City Hall or county building.
That is an interesting point. We have about 5 minutes left, Bill.
All right. And on that note, let's talk a little bit about some advice that your father, Jack Morris, gave you when you first thought about becoming involved in this. It wasn't advice that you necessarily took, but he told you something about the balance between civic involvement and where you get your paycheck from.
Right. So when I was considering applying for the job that I'm in now, I had been a volunteer board member and very active with the then Center City Commission and enjoying that, but I was a private sector lawyer, and my dad, I spoke to him about wanting to apply for this job, and he discouraged me from doing that, saying basically, Paul, I want you to get very heavily involved in community service as he has in his life, but I want you to always get your paycheck from the private sector. And his advice was you can do more good for the community getting your paycheck from the private sector and finding ways to give back on a volunteer basis. And that's how he's always patterned his life and done a lot of good community service. So he had kind of discouraged me from taking this kind of quasi-public job.
Mm-hmm. So after doing that, though, you decided you weren't going to make a career out of this in that position.
Right. So I did apply for the job, and it wasn't a sure thing by far. There was a lot of really good applicants for the job. But once I did get the job, and while I was applying, I told the board that was hiring me that I was not going to make a career out of this, and certainly wasn't going to retire from this job. But I wanted to come in, spend some time with a sense of urgency to try to get some things done, and then get back into the private sector.
Right. Does having a time limit of sorts on this, it's also allowed you to really speak your mind more so than someone who's looking for a long career arc out of this?
I think that's right. I mean, absolutely. I feel like I've always spoken my mind. I mean, I try to be diplomatic where diplomacy is appropriate, but when I think something's not good for the city or not good for downtown, I've always felt free to speak my mind. And part of that is that I knew I wasn't going to be here for a long time, and eventually I would go back to the private sector. I think there is something to be said for that.
Let me race through some things. We have about 4 minutes left here. We've talked about some big projects that Bass Pro and entertainment projects, Beale Street, FedEx Forum, some things that have really worked. We've talked about the housing, and really kind of, if people haven't driven through what's going on in South Main, it's pretty remarkable. What has not worked so well is office space. It's been a mixed bag over the last 5 years. Some successes you've talked about, First Tennessee re-upped, Raymond James kept some of its staff, but there's really, I mean, on some level, a second, and almost some would say primary, central business district in Memphis, which is around the Ridgeway I-240 loop. Do you look back at that and feel like we should have done something different to stop that migration?
Well, it is discouraging that our biggest successes in the office sector over the last 5 years are retentions and not new. Now, in my first year on this job, I spent probably half my time working on a deal to recruit Pinnacle Airlines downtown, and felt pretty proud that we got Pinnacle and this new big company with hundreds of new employees to fill up an office building downtown. And then within a year, of course, their stock had tanked and they went bankrupt. So that was obviously incredibly discouraging. But we did, it is discouraging, and in terms of what we should do differently, over the next 5, 10, 15 years, I actually do think that there's a movement towards downtown office, not only in Memphis, but across the country. Those out east brand new office buildings won't be brand new in 10, 15 years, and they will still lack character. And downtown will still be the heartbeat of our city.
The South Main, the Main Street demonstration project, I mean, Main Street towards Beale Street, a lot of development. There was a demonstration block, businesses that went in and so on. There are a couple of buildings, though, that are still blighted, that you've not been able that no one has been able to move those owners. Does the city need more tools, better tools to move property owners?
Yeah, I think so. There's a balance. I mean, in America, property owners have a lot of rights, and that's appropriate. But unfortunately, a lot of property owners who are either speculators or dreamers that cannot develop their properties, they're hurting the surrounding neighborhoods. So they're hurting other people's property values, and that's been a really discouraging. We've had a lot of great success with South Main and other things, but we've had a lot of success remedying blight. We've got a lot of blight remedied, but there is still a lot of blight. There's still a lot of empty office space. There's plenty of work for my successor to do.
Right. Last couple questions. People talk about grocery store. I heard there was a commercial gathering recently where someone talked, I won't name who, was optimistic a grocery store in downtown in the next year or so. Are you optimistic that might happen?
I am. A couple of the white whales we've been chasing for a long time are a grocery store, and of course we have grocery stores downtown.
Yeah,
Miss
right.
Gordia's, Central
I
City.
should clarify, a larger
City
kind of more
Market,
full
but a
service, yeah.
larger full-service grocery store is in the works now. Whether it's actually going to happen, I can't guarantee, but that's
Right.
in the works, as well as a movie theater, which is another thing we've been chasing for quite a while.
And Central Station, what's going to happen down there? There's development in the works potentially around the farmers market. What might happen?
It's very exciting. Central Station is the cornerstone of the South Main district, which really extends from the Orpheum to Central Station. And it's got over $200 million of already announced and ongoing projects. Not included in that figure is the redevelopment of Central Station, which could include residential and retail and other kind of amenities that have not been announced yet. But it's very exciting to see Central Station further redeveloped.
Hotels down there?
The projects, the particular uses have not been announced, but I would see the South Main District a great place for a hotel.
All right. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
you.
Thank you, Bill. Join us again next week. Thanks. Good night.
Funding for Behind the Headlines is provided by DHG and Advisors. DHG is a full-service accounting firm serving Memphis and the Mid-South region for more than 60 years, combining community involvement with the technical resources of a national firm. For more information, visit dhgllp.com.